So we are very, very happy to welcome Common Views, David Behar, Perahia, probably a little bit mispronounced, sorry, and then Farberoff. So both of them are together Common Views and a collective that was formed in 2019. And it is a process based on site-specific projects which they develop addressing contested issues in local context within a wider social, ecological, common perspective. Previous Common Views projects have taken place in the Middle East and in Europe, with upcoming ones planned in Africa and South America. And I think the website will also show, hopefully, so everybody can have a look into all of your projects, but I hope that you will see at least some of them, and we are very happy to welcome you here.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and thank you very much, Dorothee, and to Ronald for this invitation. We're very excited to be here. Actually, David has COVID, so it should have been me and him up here, but unfortunately cannot come. But he's with us in Zoom, and he'll be present for the question and answers session later on. So I would like to start with a short video.
What is so special about your work is that you come to a place and you work very closely with the location, with the materials of the location, and with the local people. And I loved how open you were to, you came with an idea, but then you were very open-minded to adapt it to the location.
כולם הגיעו, ילדים, מבוגרים, זקנים, כולם הגיעו ושמו יד כולם בשביל ללכת לחפור את הבאר של המים. זה חוויה, אני לא אשכח את זה.
It's highly political, but you never like read anywhere the word politics, you know. And this is something I find fantastic, and I think it's therefore opening up an entry to a very complex theme for humans, where if you would use other words, they would probably say like, no, I don't want to discuss politics, environmental change, it's all too big for me.
אני חושבת שנגיד המושג באמת של ה-common, זה המושג הזה או המושג של הביוספירה, פתאום שאתה אומר למישהו, אתה כמו כל צמח בסביבה שלך. זה משהו שכאילו פותח לך לכולם. זה לא עכשיו כאילו אתם תתפייסו. זה, אנחנו רגע אחד כאילו פותחים לך איזה חלון למציאות אחרת, כאילו. וזה החוזק של הדברים.
The project, I must say that it was very heart-touching, and going through such situations back in my life when I was a kid, I could feel carrying out the luggage, the kind of exhausting situation when you have to carry your things displaced from your own house, go to a different place, settle out there.
ילדים עמדו לידי ואני הייתי מתרגש ועד דמעות, שראיתי אותם, הם עומדים עם מיקרופון ביד וקוראים שירה ומקריאים שירה בביטחון עצמי כזה.
ההתייחסות למסורת, להתייחסות לאדמה, וזה מקשר את האנשים אחד לשני גם, לא רק מקשר אותם למקום שלהם.
פה הייתה אפשרות לאמפתיה מהצד של המבקרת, שאני בעצם קוראת לה מעורבת. אצלכם הקהל הוא מעורב, מי שבא לצפות בתערוכה, הוא לא קהל שצופה במשהו, הוא חייב להיות מעורב.
וזה היה נורא יפה לראות איך דוד עשה לו את הקונסטרוקציה הזאת, כאילו הפשיט אותו דרך מחשבה נורא מינימליסטית וצורנית, כאילו הוא הפשיט את הרוג'ום ובעצם אנחנו הלבשנו אותו מחדש. יש משהו בפעולה הזו שהוא מבטא את כל המהות הזאת אולי, של אומנות השתתפותית מצד אחד, ושל הארגז כלים, שלוקח את ההיסטוריה ומעביר אותה לתוך ההווה, ועושה את זה בכלים עדכניים.
The most beautiful moment, it was probably when the guy who was really like, I see was against it, and in like 4 or 5 days, he was the first who was like taking the sticks on his hands and really want to be the person who was providing this situation. Yes.
הפרויקט הזה נתן איזה קפיצה קדימה לקבוצה שלנו של שכנות טובה, ובהמשך אנחנו פיתחנו קבוצת נשים משותפת, זאת אומרת, והעומק שהקבוצה הזאת נכנסת אליה הולך וגדל.
For me it was of bringing really art into biosphere reserves and talk about it from a different perspective and bring the scientists into the communication. That was something very unique and I think very important.
If environmental reconciliation is going to come, it's going to come through art and not through science. Science can always supply the baseline, but it's not going to change people. If it hasn't changed people's minds now, it's never going to change people's minds.
So as Dorothea said, me and David Perahia, we are the Common Views Collective, or the founders of the Common Views Collective. And we formed Common Views in 2019, following an invitation from the Arad Contemporary Art Center to create an exhibition there. As the basis for the exhibition, we conducted a participatory arts project in this region of the desert region of Arad, in collaboration with the curator Irit Carmon-Popper. In this project, we worked with members of the local communities in this area, which is an area that has, where conflict is present on many levels, on social, political, and also environmental. So working on this project, we realized the importance of examining the environmental aspects of social and political challenges, and of viewing these within a common perspective of a social-ecological framework. What we call this approach the environmental reconciliation, and what environmental reconciliation is, how it has evolved over the course of our projects, and how it finds its expression in our work is at the center of this presentation today. So over the course of our projects, we developed a modus operandi, which involves initially site-specific research and interaction with what we call agents, identifying points of contention, developing mediating themes and mediating elements and mediating actions, which we'll go into further detail during the presentation, and then the evolution of these mediating elements throughout over the course of our work and our projects. So our projects begin with a period of site-specific research, which includes conversations with people who are already engaged in a local context. And they can be officials, creatives, community leaders, educators, researchers, and we call these people agents, which is a term that implies agency and active involvement. In the clip in the beginning, you saw a selection of our project collaborators, who are considered our primary agents, but then, and in this image, you see a trilingual list in Hebrew, Arabic, and English of project participants and collaborators from our initial project in the region of Arad, which was presented at the exhibition. And as we work on a project, this network of agents expands further into an intricate web of collaborators, participants, and other additional actors. And those interactions with agents are very important for us, and they're based on listening and on establishing trust and forging solidarity. So if we go back to this idea of a modus operandi, So following from this initial site research and from those interactions with the agents, they enable us to pinpoint the points of contention and tension within the set of local relationships. So we explore these nodes of tension within a social ecological context and develop them into these mediating themes and into mediating elements. These elements, then they can be sites or objects, and they serve as a focus for commenting actions that include interaction and public participation. And the aim of the actions is to develop a sense of mutual responsibility and empathy with the other and with the environment among the local communities that we work with. These mediating elements then evolve, as I said before, from local context to from one local context to another over the course of our work, which is a process that we can see when we reflect on our previous projects. So if we go into the context of our first initial project, which I mentioned earlier, in the area of Arad. The Jewish town of Arad is situated, as you can see in the map there, you can see Arad and the nearby Al-Bakia Valley and the Dead Sea nearby, which gives you a bit of a context in terms of the larger region. The primarily Jewish town of Arad is situated in an extremely arid desert, and it's surrounded by a large population of Bedouins. So while we were exploring this area, we were confronted by the very wide disparities that exist between these two communities, which led us to initiate a conversation with the Bedouin community leaders at this Al-Bakia Valley, which is a broad desert valley that lies just to the east of the town. Al-Bakia is home to a number of extended Bedouin families. They live in villages that are officially unrecognized by the Israeli authorities. These are makeshift settlements. They're composed of a collection of shacks, as you can see in the image. They have no paved roads. They are not connected to the electricity grid. They have no official water supply. And this is water, of course, is a vital resource in a very arid, hyper-arid desert region. Here you can see participants of one of our project actions during a visit to a Bedouin unrecognized village. The makeshift structures that you can see in the background and the lack of paved roads and other facilities are typical for such settlements. The Bedouins in Al-Bakia, there's this very specific story for them, which is actually is echoed for other Bedouins in the region, that they were displaced to this area in the 1950s by the Israeli authorities. And they are restricted from practicing their nomadic traditions and herding traditions. At the same time, they're also not allowed to build any permanent structures and establish any permanent presence. And as a result, they're all under an ever-present threat of eviction and further displacement. By contrast, the residents of the town of Arad have modern facilities, running water, etc., and are to a great extent entirely disconnected from the realities and the insecure existence of their Bedouin neighbors and of the surrounding desert. So we began this conversation with the Bedouin community leaders, and when we asked them what actions could help in addressing their community's uncertain situation, the leaders said proposed to us that we engage with the local traditional practice of rainwater harvesting. And they introduced us to the many water cisterns that exist in the area, and until only 3 decades ago, where provided the primary source of water for the inhabitants of Al-Bakia. In this image, you can see different kinds of cisterns. You have cisterns that are sort of bell-shaped and have a small opening. You can see me and David there peering into one, and then you have the more bigger open type of cisterns. You can see one of them there where after heavy rains in the desert, and they actually do fill up with quite a bit of water. So most of these cisterns, since the introduction of an official water pipeline, have fallen into disrepair. The Bedouins have replaced the cisterns with plastic water tanks and with PVC, these black PVC pipes, which you see in the images, which they pull water from the official government supplied pipeline all the way to the settlements through the very hot desert. The abandoned cisterns were subjected to actions of enclosure by the state, and they were designated as archaeological sites, which effectively prohibits any kind of intervention. Any intervention is actually intervention without permission is illegal. So it's an illegal offense. So the Bedouins in Al-Bakia, they view these cisterns as representing their connection to the land and as part of their cultural landscape. And we could also see how the introduction of a water supply and the control of this vital resource by the government, it exemplified the dramatic shift that the Bedouins have gone through from being self-reliant to dependence on the state. So this initial research and interaction with the Bedouins led us to focus on the mediating theme of water as a scarce resource. So this is basically the first example of how we use the mediating theme in our projects. And the theme of water as a scarce resource, it expresses the disparities in terms of access to resources and in terms of civil inequalities that exist between these two communities and these two locations of Arad and Al-Bakia. At the same time, this mediating theme also allows us to expand the conversation to include the broader underlying themes, which are control and exploitation of natural resources, the global water crisis, the climate crisis, and the relationship between humans and the environment in general. This social ecological reframing allowed us to address a wide range of interrelated and otherwise potentially highly contested issues. And by focusing on the Bedouin tradition of rainwater harvesting, we could make use of local knowledges to advance an overall vision of desert sustainability. In conversation with the Bedouins, we chose a large cistern, which you can see in this image. It's an open cistern, as you saw in the images earlier, known as Bir Alatin, which is we chose as the site for a series of actions and interventions, which included an introductory tour for residents of nearby Arad, actions to renew the rainwater harvesting channels that lead to the cisterns, an action to renew the cistern's sedimentation pool, which is where the rainwater collects before it goes into the main big cistern pool. And finally, we had a dance and music performance that took place at the final event of when the exhibition was actually opened, which was devised by our project collaborator, Iris Nais. Here you can see a mixed audience, which viewing the performance drew both local inhabitants from Al-Bakia and people from further afield. These participatory actions, they served as the meeting points for the Bedouins from Al-Bakia and Jewish residents of Arad, and successfully brought together people from very diverse backgrounds to work together and collaborate, which really can't be underestimated when you consider the region's very bitter political and cultural divisions. So we use the cistern as a common ground for bringing together people with very different interests, people who have a love of nature, or maybe they profess a love of the land, or of history and archaeology, or of ecology, or maybe specifically of Bedouin culture and tradition. So all these people came together to take part in these actions. We also had a very lively online community interaction during that time. And here you can see some examples there in Hebrew, because it's a lingua franca, and most of the Hebrew speakers don't speak Arabic, so the Bedouins were communicating in Hebrew. But But these interactions were very often expressions of great solidarity. We had some, personal tragedies happening, but there were also times when there is a political, politically heated periods when that political debate from, the more broader political debate impacted on the relationships between the people within the community of this impromptu project community. Issues of territory and ownership formed the layer of our exploration, and the actions in Bir Melatin required that we enter into conversations with the heads of the Bedouin family in whose territory this cistern is located. But at the same time, the cistern was also located in the projected area of a whole list of government agencies and authorities. And we had to negotiate all these relationships. And as part of the project, we mapped all these relationships, which you can see here. And you can see it a bit more detailed. In the middle, there's Al-Bakia residents, and you can see how much they are impacted by all these different agencies that have sometimes a very adverse impact on their lives. And this vying for control over land and resources is expressed at all levels. The intervention at the site required that we negotiate this complex dynamics of power. Here you can see us in discussions with representatives of Israel's Antiquity Authority, from whom we needed to get permission in order to intervene in the site, together with the head of one of the Bedouin families, the Bedouin family who was actually living nearby this cistern. So from this initial research and a series of participatory actions, we developed our exhibition for the Arad Contemporary Art Center. And we used the exhibition space as a new mediating site. So we used it to allow for the wider public to engage with the themes we're exploring. Documentation from the above actions and interviews, and as well as maps and research material, were presented in the exhibition within a central, what we called dreaming space. And then in parallel, there were new artworks that explored the theme of water as a scarce resource and served as mediating elements for the issues of ownership, inequity that I mentioned earlier. In order to mediate the issue of Bedouins' current challenges of water sourcing to the wider and mostly unaware Jewish public, we created this network of tanks and PVC pipes, which we scavenged in the desert and then set up in the gallery. These pipes then run through a whole series of tanks and then spilled out into the public space outside of the gallery, so that the people who did not actually step into the gallery could not avoid being confronted with those issues. There was also a series of photographic images that explored again this issue of enclosure of water resources and water sources, the more past and present, as well as drawing, sculptural installations, a large selection of video installations. One such video installation is a video performance that's called Sourcing Water, which was also the name for the exhibition, in which we carried a canister of water full of water from a cistern in the valley, which is an active cistern, in kind of a futile attempt to fill up an empty swimming pool in the country club in Arad, and just to show the massive disparities in access to resources. A panoramic video dance that explored the embodied connection to the landscape and the issues that surrounding exploitation of resources. Another video performance that involved a day-long journey with a donkey. A donkey is a very common Bedouin mode of transport. And we took this donkey from Al-Bakia. It's actually a she donkey. I don't know what they call them in English. from Al-Bakia to Arad and back. Zahara was her name, and she's actually listed in the list of project participants and collaborators that I showed it earlier. Skip one. Here we go. So the piece deals with the Bedouin urban experience and the way in which the town residents are disconnected from their neighbors and from their neighbors' experience. So the public program around the exhibition also included tours, educational tours for school children of the exhibition, public hikes in which we took the Jewish population into the desert to see cisterns, but also on the way we took them to see to visit the Bedouin settlements. There were also academic seminars associated with the exhibition and more. And this occupation that we had with the equitable and sustainable use of resources over this project developed into this conversation with environmental researchers to establish a vision for a social-ecological commons in the area. And this vision, we based it on UNESCO's model of the Biosphere Reserve. I don't know if you are familiar with it, which is basically a framework for establishing a balance between the needs of a human population in an area with the needs of the environment and plant life and animal life. So our ambitious plan is vastly expanded an original plan that was created by activists from the local area. So it was a grassroots plan, but it only included the Al-Bakia immediate area as a solution for the Bedouins living there. And we just thought, why not just go crazy and say we include the town of Arad, all the Bedouin settlements around it, and we just basically equalize the equation and say everybody in this space is sharing this space, and everybody should be allowed equal access, regardless, of species, cultural background, etc. The limits of the Biosphere Reserve are marked in a green line, and the orange blobs that you can see there on the left-hand corner on the top, they're actually the Bedouin settlements in Al-Bakia. So this proposal of a social-ecological commons that brings the needs of all inhabitants and life forms into consideration was presented at the exhibition, which helped to generate a much needed conversation about the inherent value of such an inclusive perspective. And here you can see us discussing, this is David, discussing with some of the Bedouin community leaders at the exhibition and having a conversation about this idea. So another theme that arose from, or mediating theme that arose from our explorations at Al-Bakia and Arad is the idea of the path or the way as a link between communities and their environment. So between communities and so the disparate communities, and then between those communities and their environment. So this initially took shape as a concept for a proposed walking trail. So the idea was that it would link the Jewish town with the Bedouin settlements around the town while passing through the rainwater harvesting cisterns. This concept led to the creation of a series of objects which would be used as way markers. So markers that would mark this path of the proposed trail. These mediating objects were inspired by the water sourcing reality of the Bedouin community. So we combined materials and forms, and we fused the traditional with the contemporary. And the traditional is this, you can see here on the very left, there's the image of what is known as a rujum. And the rujum is a pile of rocks or stones that the locals use in order to mark the paths in the desert. And we combine this with the water tanks that the Bedouins use now as a replacement to the cisterns that they used to use before. So you can see they have this sort of metal grid around them. They're made of plastic, may have a metal grid around them. And this combination brought us to this sort of form, this pyramidal form that became the framework for the Rujum sculptures. So this was also an opportunity for us to invite local women to engage with our work there. And we invited both Bedouin and Jewish women to knit and weave tapestries that would then become part of these Rujum sculptures. And the process, so it was a great opportunity for us to engage with the Bedouin women community, which up to that point was entirely inaccessible to us, being men and being from outside of the Bedouin community. And we developed a series of color palettes, which you can see there on the left, that are based on the cultural backgrounds of the women that we were working with. So we had women from Bedouin background, but also in the Arad community, there were people whose background was from Russian heritage or Ukrainian or Chilean or Moroccan, etc. And we just incorporated those color palettes we gave them the palettes and then they just went ahead and knitted whatever they wanted to knit. And these tapestries were then integrated into the Rujum sculptures, which you can see here presented at the exhibition at the Arad Contemporary Art Center as symbolic markers of this proposed path. Here you can see the group of knitters women knitters from Arad, and standing next to the creations of their Bedouin counterparts. The Bedouin women did not consent to be photographed in this occasion. The community in Al-Bakia is very traditional, very patriarchal, and the women there really, our interactions with them are always through an intermediary. The concept of the way marker served as a stepping stone and the mediating element for our next project in the region in 2021, which took place in the Bedouin town of Kseife. Here you can see some images of Kseife. Kseife is close by, it's not far away from Arad and Al-Bakia. And in our interactions with the local agents in Kseife, we were confronted early on with issues of enclosure vis-a-vis the landscape, ownership of land, access to public space. The issue is that the local communities in Kseife were displaced again. They were displaced and moved to that specific location 40 years ago because of the creation of Israeli Air Force Base nearby. So this led to competition around space, access to space, and land between the Bedouins in Kseife, and at times leads to violent conflict between the extended family clans. So there is overall a general lack of solidarity and cooperation, which is an issue in this Bedouin town. So this situation required that we negotiate those conflicting groups, competing power brokers, and the very delicate relationships. So the theme of the way became for us somehow pivotal because it allowed, also in Bedouin tradition, the way, and you can see here in the image, there's Kseife marked there, but you can see the network of the ancient desert paths or desert roads that actually connected between settlements and water sources in the desert. And those desert ways are very important in Bedouin tradition because they are neutral territory and they allow one to pass through these contested areas without any issue or problem. So once you're walking on the road, you are fine. So this we use this in order to be able to make that connection and create this neutral zone which we could work in. So with the aim of increasing the horizontality of our project and the accessibility to the local community, we collaborated closely with Bedouin artist Said Abu Ranam. And we also collaborated with a group of Bedouin environmental educators, which helped our interactions, especially with the Bedouin women community. Together, our work involved groups of local Bedouin school children, women, which you saw in the slide before, which we chose these groups as potential agents for transformation, as well as elderly men. We worked with groups of elderly men or elders, community elders, as a link to past tradition. So we brought those two things together. And again, we relied on the existing local native knowledges of sustainability in the desert from the Bedouin practices of desert agriculture, of rainwater harvesting, etc., to link the past and the future. This rujum, or the way marker, served us again as a way to mark this symbolic path, and which is an extension of the path that the symbolic idea of a path connecting Al-Bakia and Arad. So then this idea evolved because we were working with a community that is much more sedentary. Al-Bakia is a more nomadic tradition. In Kuseife, they were more sedentary community and they're more agriculturally based. So we then created a sustainable desert garden around this Rujum sculpture. And the gardens served us as a site for mediating actions with the children and with the wider community. You can see here school children from Seife participating in the process of, with one of the environmental educators. Sfea is also there, and they are putting in organic material into this very poor soil, and then also creating ornaments for this desert garden, which was later on planted with plants. This Rujum sculpture then developed further into the idea of a dew harvester, because we thought, okay, we are going to place it in the middle of a sustainable desert garden. What function does this way marker serve? And we then developed it into this dew harvester. If I don't know if you're familiar with this idea, basically you have some netting, and then overnight the netting gathers whatever humidity there is in the air and then brings it down to the soil, to the ground. Then this sculpture was placed in the middle of the garden for the final celebrations of the project. Plants were planted by the children and also participants of this final event. Another pivotal element of this project was the use of language, which was informed by our collaboration with Saad Abu Anam. And the language, the reason for that was because language plays a very central role in Bedouin society and culture. Much more, we found that they are much more familiar with it than with visual representations and more formalist representations. So it was, again, an avenue for us to make a connection with the local community. This led us to focus on poetry, on storytelling as primary avenues for participation. And here you can see a group of elders from Kseife during one of the workshops with Elham, who's again one of the facilitators that was working together with us. And then these elders then shared their stories of life in the desert, of sustainability and sustainable practices with the children that we were working with. The children then took part in creative writing workshops, writing poetry on the topic of water and the ways in the desert, which they then read and performed in the project's final event. In the following clip, you'll see one of the young girls reading her poetry that was written during the duration of the project.
لطالما اشتقت للذهاب إلى الصحراء لكي أرى وأمتع نظري بالبئر الصغير الذي كان الناس قبل أعوام يأخذون الماء منه، وعندما ينتهي هنا يأتي دور الأمطار. يا ليتني أعود إلى الماضي وأرى الأطفال عندما كانوا يلعبون حوله وألعب معه. إن هذا البئر الصغير لم يعد الناس يأخذون الماء منه، والآن فقط القافلات الذاهبة والقادمة إذا ينقصها الماء يأخذون القليل من البئر، وأنا أعيش وحيدة مع بئري الصغير. وشكرا لكم.
So as you can see, these were very lively events, loads of children, a lot of people participating from the local community. Here you can see another development. We, together with a local artist, Lubna Masoudin, who's a calligrapher, we created these calligraphic representations of sections of the poems that were written by children. All of these sentences have to do with water and connection to the land. This image was taken during a performance at the final event of the project there of Bedouin music by Ensemble Shargi and Yair Dalal, who took part. And the concept also then evolved into a proposal for the next stage of the project, again, using this way marker as a way of connecting yet another settlement, this time Al Foua, which is a contested place where there is a proposal for a very big strip mine for mining phosphate. So there is a whole civil protest movement around that place. And we are again proposing to put up there this way marker, part of this path that links those communities in the region, using rain dew harvesting methodologies, integrating calligraphy and local craft or whatever. I mean, this is a proposal. Of course, once we come to the site and we start working with the people on the ground, things evolve and it might take a different shape. Then this is the third and final mediating theme that I'm going to show today. And this one arose from our explorations in Al-Bakia and Arad. And this is of the gathering space. So this idea of the gathering space, it's started in Al-Bakia and Arad, and then we took it also to other projects abroad, so outside of in Europe and in Germany and in Poland. But during our project in the area of Al-Bakia, our meetings with the Bedouins and with the participants of our participatory actions took place very often inside these gathering space, communal gathering spaces that the Bedouins call shig. That's their name for these spaces, and this is where the Bedouin men traditionally gather to drink coffee, drink tea, eat, and it's also where the community welcomes guests from the outside. So it's kind of a neutral place where they feel comfortable to welcome guests. In this image, you can see us with the Bedouins and at the meeting at the shig. This is with one of the heads of the Bedouin families. Participants that during one of the actions in one of those shigs, and also these structures were formerly made out of camel. There were tents made out of camel hair, but nowadays they're constructed from lightweight materials that include also corrugated iron sheets, other cheap lightweight materials. Which basically these materials, they reflect both the Bedouin tradition of light impermanent construction and their nomadic traditions, but also importantly, they reflect the ever-present threat of demolition and their need to recover from these kind of catastrophes or calamities, because these are materials that they can then easily reuse. In our project in Kuseifa, we used again this structure or this concept of the shik as a communal gathering spaces for our final event of the project. And you can see here our collaborator side lecturing on Bedouin poetry in one of those. So these were structures that were erected especially for this event. And again, these were neutral ground where all the inhabitants of Kuseifa could feel comfortable to come regardless of their clan affiliation, family relationships, and also where they felt comfortable to welcome people from outside of the community, so namely the Jewish, wider Jewish community from outside of Seifa. So another example of how we strip down these complex issues and then evolve them is so we use the aesthetics of the shik and the materials of the shik to create a new mediating element, which is a sculptural installation. So you can see here, there's a couple of corrugated sheets that we use where they just lie around in the desert. It's very common to find them around Bedouin settlements because they actually do fly away in the winds. And we position them in a very sort of pared down semblance of a confined gathering space. As you can see, it's positioned in the gallery. And a recorded conversation with the representatives of with the leaders of the Bedouin community, which we had during the course of our project, in which they tell us about their insecure existence, the ever-present threat of eviction and demolition. And this conversation was played through those, so through resonators, through those corrugated iron sheets, through these two sheets. And it was accompanied by video projections of those sheets flying in the wind in the desert. So the whole kind of experience was a bit ominous and really unsettling. So there's a short video of this of these pieces at the exhibition. So this concept of the gathering space then evolved into new projects. This one that you can see in the image are concept drawings for a project that we did in Poland, in the Jewish quarter of Kazimierz, in the city of Krakow in southern Poland. So we further explored the role of the gathering spaces and the rituals around these gathering spaces, or the gathering rituals, and the role that they play in social ecological resilience for displaced communities. Our initial agents in Krakow included the performance artist Adam Ritzke and an anthropologist also that we worked with, Oskar Cresson. And in conversation with them, and through investigating the location's history and contemporary culture, contemporary concerns, we developed this installation in the form of a transitory modular gathering space. So somehow inspired by the shik. The basis for the design lay in versatility of construction, inspiration from nomadic vernacular forms, and the reliance on local gathered materials, which required a broader local participation. So here you can see children of one of our project collaborators taking part in locally harvesting the woods that's needed for the structure. The installation was accompanied by the procession of the displaced, which we call it, which was performed by volunteers and set out every morning from the center of Kazimierz each day to a new location. The structure was erected every day in a new location and then dismantled in the evening and taken back to the center of Kazimierz. You can see here Adam Ritzke, our collaborator, reading the proclamation that was read every morning when the procession set out on its way. It's a proclamation that announces the issues with which we deal in this piece. You'll see it later in the video. The dismantled structure of this tent all fit into this box, which you can see here being carried by the procession. And the box served us as a kind of symbolic ark, we call it, of social ecological resilience. So this box contained all the elements that are required by society to sustain itself as it is uprooted and displaced. This tent structure, the tent of assembly, was then erected every day in a new location on the banks of the Vistula River in Krakow. Here you can see one location and another and another. And in this image, you can see the detailed assembly instructions that came with this piece, because the idea was that the volunteers should be able to actually do the whole process of the procession and the setting up of the structure and the taking it down without us, the artists, being present. So it was kind of a very autonomous piece. They were offered a choice of 15 different permutations and to the modular structure's size and shape. In these images, you can see the box, which was then placed in the center of this structure as the hub for this gathering space, which was then covered with a kind of a tablecloth that showed images of a journey of displacement and arrival. And this box also was served as a sound installation of recorded interviews with displaced persons currently residing in Krakow, which were recorded by our collaborator Oscar, who did a research on this issue.
Wszystkie ofiary wszelkiej przemocy, wszystkie czujących i czujące, zapraszamy do miejsca nie miejsca.
So I just want to show the final project. So there's this element of the theme of the gathering space then accompanied us on a couple of further projects in biosphere reserves in Germany. And we worked, one example is a project that we did in the biosphere reserve in Spreewald, which is just south of Berlin, which is an area, a large area, an inland delta with a labyrinth of waterways and wetlands. Again, we responded to an invitation to create an artwork in public space by creating this kind of gathering space and shelter. And the idea was that to create a semblance of a structure that the local community from Spreewald would erect if they were to suffer some kind of climate calamity, some kind of a flood. So we used local materials, so traditionally locally grown materials. Got wood out of the forest together with a local craftsperson, Achim Noka. We used linen and hemp, which are traditionally locally grown materials. And this is, you can see here the installation as it's erected, and this blue dyeing on the fabric was inspired by the local traditions of it's called Blauwdruck. But we basically integrated images of the reflection of the forest onto the water, the nearby water. And then we also integrated again the voices from the local community. Here you can see one contributor, which is the elderly amateur poet Frau Batz, Edith Batz, who is reading and singing aloud some of her poets and songs about life in Spreewald, and you will see her doing that in our final video.
Internationale Künstlerinnen und Künstler stellen im Spreewald aus, mitten in der Natur. Das Festival Aquamediale.
Kunst, die im Dialog mit der Natur ist, kann ein großes Publikum ansprechen. Das ist der richtige Weg.
Die beiden Künstler sind verabredet mit der 88-jährigen Dorfdichterin Edith Batz. In ihren Installationen verarbeiten sie das, was sie vor Ort erfahren. Ihnen ist es wichtig, Menschen kennenzulernen und ihre Geschichten.
Was wollt ihr eigentlich wissen und hören?
Uns interessiert am meisten alle Geschichten, die mit Wasser zu tun haben.
In schleppziger Mundart schreibt Edith Batz seit mehr als 30 Jahren Lieder und Gedichte.
Aber in Spree hat fast jeder schwimmen gelernt und sich aus das Flache dann entfernt, ist dann eine dreiste Rieberschwumm auf die andere Seite gut angekommen. Wir sitzen im Kahn und lehnen uns an und fahren die Spree entlang. Der Fährmann, der starkt, was jedem behagt, gemütlich ist auf der Bank. Wir hören schon bald, wenn ein Kranich ruft, schallt, im schönen Unterspreewald, im schönen Unterspreewald.
So the process that we've described, or I've described, that evolves from project to project of mediation and reframing is accompanied by some questions that we constantly ask ourselves, ongoingly ask ourselves. So we wanted to posit those questions to you, maybe as a way of starting a discussion. And they have to do with us being outsiders in local context. So we are very aware that we are coming into a local context that we are foreign to, and we don't spend a great deal of time there, relatively to to people who are actually maybe activists in the area, people who are actually from the community. So this question of what does it mean to arrive from outside and how to do this effectively. And we found, of course, that our interactions with agents are very helpful in this regard, but there are always sub-contexts that remain inaccessible to us. And we found that also if we insist somehow on maintaining a position of listening and of acceptance, usually the responses are positive, and this helps engender solidarity. Also already questions in the chat. Okay, great. So, and next question has to do with continuity. So, of course, if we come to a local context, it's like what happens after we leave? And how is this sustainable for the local community? And we found that, our approach is to come as catalysts, as initiators. And we found that there's a big advantage to us coming in for a very short time because it creates this sort of energy and momentum that then community leaders, people who are active in the area, can then build on this momentum. And we've experienced that actually, yes, following our projects, there has been a continuation and an expansion of the activities that we were engaged in. And then for us, the advantage is that we get to do what we term cyclical learning. So from context to context, we get to do a sort of a comparative study in a way, where we use a comparative approach to say, okay, this worked here. What does it mean to bring this to a new context? What are the similarities? What are the differences? And a very important question is, how do we position ourselves vis-a-vis authorities? Because we do work in contested areas, sometimes in very open conflict, like with dealing with issues of very open conflict. And then this our approach is to somehow try and strike a balance between working with and working against. And we found that our reframing, the social ecological reframing, allows us to deal with issues that otherwise, if we came from a, from a political social perspective, people would immediately shut us down or shut off to our message. And we've even had actually instances of censorship where the minute people, authorities, organizers thought that our work was political, they had a problem with it. But once we managed to convince them that no, it's not political, it's social ecological, they were fine with it, even though we changed nothing at all about the work. So in conclusion, I'd like to return to this idea of environmental reconciliation, the term that I mentioned at the beginning, as a kind of overarching concept for our work, which is in a nutshell, this adoption of a commoning perspective and a social ecological reframing in the context of arts engagement. So to us, the political and the environmental are firmly intertwined. To address one, you have to address the other. And we see our roles as motivators, stimulators, catalysts of the commoning process. And so at this stage of our work, our thoughts are around expanding our collective. So we very much invite people who are interested in this type of work to approach us and to start a conversation with us and become involved in our work of Common Views in whatever way you feel like. Thank you very much. So are there any questions, or are you moderating it, Dorothee? No? Okay.
There's just a question about budgeting, but you can decide if you want to take first question.
You can decide. I think you have more of an overview of what's going on. Yeah.
Let's start with this question earlier about, of course, how to fund these kinds of long-term projects.
Okay, that's a big question. Do you want to answer that, David? Because you have been silent the whole time.
Can you repeat the question for me?
Yeah, how do we budget? How do we finance our work?
So it's in the chat from Santiago Torres.
I will say that our funding is usually public funds, and we try to create it until now in the cultural spectrum of funding, which is usually not enough. It's a very
Okay, I'll try. Yeah, I'll try. David, your connection is very, very bad. So we hear you intermittently. But I think what he was saying is that basically, yes, we apply for public funding and we use public funding. And sometimes it comes from, large governmental funds, sometimes from smaller ones. We were funded by more alternative green funding specifically for environmental projects. And it's something, it's an ongoing question. And I think we primarily apply for arts practice-based funding. But then we are beginning to look at funds that are open more for the collaborative aspect of our work, because we work with scientists, we work with social researchers, and so there are actually other funds that are potentially open to us. Next question.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I wanted to ask, at which stage in the project you come up with an exhibition or a format for a final presentation, so to say, and how does it impact the further stages of the project, so to say? Do you have any strategies to do this translation?
Okay. Thank you. That's a great question. I think, well, in our work, we try not to make a distinction between that process, collaborative process, sort of devising process, maybe, and the presentation and the exhibition, because very often our work will just be presented as part of that process of participation and creation. Sometimes the presentation happens within the white cube, exhibition white cube, and then we have the challenge of translating it into, you know, something that can communicate, can mediate. I mean, this was the part of the idea of this that I was showing in terms of how we evolve those mediating elements. So a mediating element of a location becomes a mediating element of some kind of documentation, which then gets adapted to a new mediating element, which then continues to convey the same kind of issues, but to different publics. And always we try to expand the exposure and the engagement of the public. So I don't know if you saw that in the beginning, in the first video that I showed, there was Irit, one of the researchers who's been researching our work, and she says, in your exhibitions, you don't have viewers, you have engaged people. They have to be engaged in order to, once they walk into the space. We try and create that kind of engagement. Yeah.
Hi, Dan. Thank you for the presentation. It's a question actually to you, not to David, which unfortunately is not here, I understand. After seeing the huge wave phenomena of collectives and artists and activists all over the world, mainly in the southern part of the world, does it change something in your point of view or your feeling concerning your own work?
I have to say that being here at this Documenta and meeting all these members of the different collectives and seeing their way of working is a real joy for the two of us, because sometimes in the art world, the way that we work, how we experience ourselves in the art world is we experience ourselves very much as odd fish. You know, we sort of stick out, we don't fit anywhere sometimes. And it's very nice to meet the people who really, you know, these are our peers. So we're very much speaking, you know, we speak a very familiar language somehow. And there's a lot of being said about the interculturalism or multiculturalism of this Documenta, but actually, I think it's a meeting of people who are actually very, very close culturally somehow. Maybe like come from very, you know, different geographical local contexts and celebrating their own local heritages, very much so. But at the same time, you know, we're all dealing with very similar issues in very similar ways. And I think part of what I saw is the advantage of having a bigger collective, because sometimes we always expand our collective per project. We will always have a, you know, bigger group working on a project, but there are also now people who are in a way longer term collaborators who are in the process of being slowly, I think, becoming integrated into our collective. There's environmental a researcher from Eberswalde, from the University of Sustainable Development there, Katja Arts, who was talking in the video in the beginning of the talk, and she was supposed to be here, but her van broke down on the way. So it's a really, really unfortunate. And Anne-Catherine is here, who was a curator for our project in Germany for part of the journey there. So we very much would love to have a broader collaborative network, and then also people can do things in parallel, projects in parallel, different locations, learn from one another. Yeah.
And then for the people here, you have to let us know where you put the tent.
Yes. So, well, things, it's because David has COVID now, so it's a bit puts the spoke in the wheels. Is that a term in English? I don't know, but yeah. So we were going to set it up in Zukunftsdorf, which is near Sander's house, just behind there. There's an area with the domes, and it's kind of looking at alternative energy use, sustainability, and we're going to install this installation of the tent of assembly, which you saw in the presentation there, and it was going to happen tomorrow, but now we're not so sure. But it will happen during this Documenta for sure at some point, because we got the invitation, and we might be setting it up in other locations at Documenta. Any further questions?
I think that's also a great kind of last word for the whole undertaking, and congratulations. So let's take it from here. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.